I think. Hi guys.
Hey, Sati.
Hi Shannon.
How are you?
I'm there. How about you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. So we're back live again.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're today actually. Very nice panel.
Pardon?
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Satosh and Shannon. Are you hearing me?
Sandra.
Yep, we can hear you clearly.
Hi. Good.
Good. How are things with you?
Oh man, I had a hard week. Like I just got home from work, right? It's Friday evening here. Yeah, it's been really, really busy. And I'm okay. We have, the Prime Minister giving us the big announcement on Sunday whether he's going to extend the lockdown. We've been in it for 8 weeks now and we're pretty fed up. So let's see. The epidemic is not under control, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I think people, including the authorities, are realizing that in the Caribbean, they're realizing that this is doing significant social, economic, everything is adverse.
Yeah, but here, like this week, we've had second wave of migration, millions of people, walking out to their villages, to the trains. Some trains have resumed for the migrants. So lots and lots of people are on the move again, and it's more managed this time. Like the states that are receiving them have either testing them and they're quarantining them and whatever. But we do expect a second wave, of the outbreak. So yeah, it's really a balancing act for the government. There's no right answer to this question. When do you stop with the lockdown? I mean, so many people have lost their jobs here. It's been very economically devastating. So
Dr. Pichainarongk,
I'm just getting tired.
So both Dr. Pichainarongk and Dr. Vokaty, good evening to you guys.
Good morning.
Yeah. Okay, good. So we're expecting Calum Macpherson and Antonia as well, Antonia MacDonald, to join us, and yeah, that'll be it. So I'm just going to ask you guys, just going to introduce the session. Maybe just provide a bit of an overview of the course and where we are, etc. And then I'll invite each and every one of you to just make some comments, general comments, especially in terms of where you're located and what's your current status, and what are some of the either the plans or the practices that's ongoing with regards to moving on from the lockdown itself. I know different countries are in different phases, whether they're still in lockdown or they're phasing out the lockdown as well. We can discuss, and then we'll open up the panel for comments and questions, and it's quite interactive.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, it's interesting times. I mean, it's every time I think about this, it's changing my projections. It's changing my perspectives as well. Yeah, very interesting. So guys, we up to about, the last time I checked was about 7,000, almost 300 students. Last time I checked, and they're very engaging and interactive, So the topic is, of course, and so we are reaching out to a lot of people, and we appreciate that the course and you guys are actually accommodating this effort as well, very much. So Dr. Pichainarongk, how are things? You guys are at the end of your week. It's Friday evening as well on your end.
That's right.
Okay, good. And in terms of Thailand's experiences, what's the latest in terms of number of cases, average per day, in let's say in the past week?
We have a case, the new case not over 10 per day. Especially today is we have a new case 7.
7, okay. And that has been consistent over a period of time, or?
Yeah.
Okay. And you guys are phasing out a lockdown, because I mean, it's not like you guys are still in lockdown.
We are started to open the lockdown right now. The last month the lockdown is proven in Thailand, but now a lot of the country is open. The people can move around. Yeah, but the department store is not open yet. It will be start on the 17th.
No, you could just use the link, the email link that I sent you. Yeah, I think you have to put your name, your email address, etc. first, and then connect it. Then you'll get a link to connecting to the Zoom link. Yeah. Hey, Shannon, I'll speak with Dr. Macpherson here. Can you probably just send him the email again with the link?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Doing that right now.
Can you send him the link to the actual session itself? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. You send you a link to the direct session, just click that link and you'll get it. Thank you. Hi, Antonia.
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. So we have Dr. Antonia MacDonald, and Dr. Antonia MacDonald is going to bring in a lot of the social and cultural aspects to our discussion today as well. We all realize that this is a health issue, it's an economic issue, it's a social issue, it's a political issue, it's cultural, and we really appreciate that context as the world considers moving on, because moving on also requires for us to move on as a society, as a culture as well, you know. Yeah. Okay. You guys got it? Okay. Shannon Rush. We have Dr. Vokaty from India, Dr. MacDonald's here with us, and Dr. Pichainarongk from Thailand. Yeah, so we're very connected. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe this is a sign, you know, for you not to connect.
Satish, because I'm.
So tell him to look at the most recent email, click on the link that you sent last night, yeah, and then fill in the information. I think
yeah.
Oh, he's connecting as me, but that's fine.
Okay, that's fine, yeah. We can just change his name, yeah. Got you, thanks. Thanks. So Sean, I'm going to rename him, yeah?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Satish.
Thank you very much. Cool. Hey guys, thank you very much. I think everyone should be in, essentially. And we really appreciate you guys joining us. We know that there's a lot going on. And for many of you, it's either the end of a very busy week, or you guys are currently, you know, in a busy week as well. So we appreciate the time that you guys are spending with us for the session very much.
I'm adding to your beer tab, Satish, when you come to Delhi.
Sandra, don't worry. Kingfisher will be flowing like the Ganges, don't worry. So guys, so thank you. We have everyone on board now, and really want to thank you on behalf of our online team. We have Shannon with us here right now, John Swope, John Modica, St. George's University. Thank you guys for connecting in and participating in this live panel. We are currently 8:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll be joining and admitting all of the persons in at 9 a.m. sharp. So in the meantime, just to give you an overview, what we will do initially, I will just make a few remarks in terms of the general course, where we are and where this panel discussion fits into the overall course structure and schedule. Then I will introduce you guys briefly, but I will ask you to do a bit more of your own introduction. And in doing so, provide your perspective in terms of where you sit, not necessarily just geographically, but where you sit as a profession. And this panel discussion is going to focus on how countries, how the world, like Sandra is going to talk about WHO, is either planning for or actually in the process of phasing out of the lockdown as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to ask you guys to make some introductory remarks, and let's say whatever is relevant to your understanding, to your expertise, to your experience as well, to that. And from that, we will essentially open up the discussion, because the main point of this panel discussion, live panel discussion, is to have interaction. So we want to encourage our attendees to interact, to share questions, comments, and they can come in on video, they can come in on audio, they can come in on the chat as well. And I will try to moderate the order, and maybe even if, depending on if there's a lull or a lack of questions or feedback coming in, I will also throw in some questions as well going forward. And so that's generally it, but it's usually a natural conversation. And it has worked very well in the past in terms of ensuring that the course community is very interactive. And we have Shannon with us, and Shannon will be there with us throughout in case we have any queries or issues as well, especially from the perspective of utilizing technology. She will be there with us to help us along the way.
Sure. So just a quick note, I think most people have likely already figured it out, but if you are not speaking and you'd like to mute yourself, you can do so on the bottom. So if you kind of hover over the images of our faces, you should see the control bar that comes up on the bottom, and you can just click the mute button. You can also use Alt-A or Command-A if you're on a Mac. To sort of automatically mute and unmute yourself. Just try to keep an eye on it so that when you do start talking, that you're not talking while you're muted. And Sandra, I'm not sure, are you interested in sharing your video with us today or not?
I think what I'll do is turn on the video when I'm speaking. Is
Sure.
that okay? Or
Yep,
you want it on all the time? Or
Nope, that's no problem. Yeah, for some folks too, if things start to lag a little bit, sometimes stopping your video can also help with a little bit of that lag as well. So yeah, that's no problem.
yeah, because
just wanted to make sure that it was
eats up
working.
the bandwidth.
Sure.
Yes.
Don't worry.
Well, I can turn it on. You can tell me if it's working.
Yep.
Can you see
Yep.
me?
Yes, it does work. Yeah, fabulous. Thanks.
Don't worry, guys. The gyms have been closed. The salons have been closed. So I'm not my best, you know. But I'm the only speaking on my behalf. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else, you know.
You're looking good, Satish.
Have you been down to the beach yet, Satish?
That's right. That's right. We did twice this week because it opened back up on Tuesday. So both Dr. Macpherson and I have done our rounds.
Nice.
Yeah, the beach is rather nice at the moment.
Definitely. Anyone have any questions in the meantime, or we're okay?
Satish, can you speak to the order in which we'll be speaking?
I'll probably ask for Sandra to go first, especially in terms of providing some comments on from the global WHO perspective. Then I would like to ask I'll probably ask Dr. Pichainarongk from Thailand, keeping east for now, you know, to speak about, especially when we think about well, Sandra particularly focused on health, but Thailand and Dr. Pichainarongk from Kasetsart University will speak about business and the economy. Then I'll probably ask Dr. Macpherson and Dr. Pichainarongk to talk about both education together, but I'll then ask Dr. Macpherson to speak about from the context of a microbiologist, a research scientist. What are some of the considerations that is essential in terms of now, but also going forward? And then I'll get to you, Antonia, especially because everything will come down to eventually how society and how individual and group dynamics play out. And by individual group dynamics, I mean both in terms of traditions, values, and behaviors, and also society as a whole as well. So we really want for you to bring that aspect of the discussion. So I'll probably get to you at the very end, but it will sort of try to encapsulate all of these different areas, because after understanding the health, the finance, the science, then how all that plays out into society and culture. What do you guys think about that?
No problem.
And what is interesting is that the discussion forum in this course has been quite aligned to the global experience, because when we first began this course, everyone was speaking about just the outbreak, the epidemiology of it, you know, the progression of cases and outbreaks around the world. And then in the second month, people began to respond and react to the essentially the interventions of social distancing, physical distancing, and the lockdowns. And the course platform is very much involved now in terms of what are some of the projections going forward as well. So the course community have pretty much been on the ball as it relates to how this entire experience is progressing along the way. It's over 2 minutes to going live, and yeah. And then, yeah.
7,000 people, Satish, do you know how many will log in?
No, not everyone will log in live. People, I mean, those who don't get it live will be receive the record itself.
Right.
But we definitely have people from around the world, and it's quite. I mean, I think, Shannon, the last check we had was almost 100 countries, or probably more by now.
Yeah, I think we're up about 120 countries at this point.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
hope Grenada's on that map.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Sandra, India is probably from a proportional perspective, India is the most represented, is number one represented country in the course.
Really?
I know
amazing.
I know you helped us do some marketing as well, and also we had our SGU's marketing recruitment team also share the course with schools and whoever is there is their email list that they interact with as well. So there's a large Indian contingent in this course.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of this course, is that we have folks who really range not only from geographic location, but also in age and in experience. So, I mean, we have high school students who are taking this course. So we've got 16, 17-year-olds, and then we've got folks up to, I think our oldest enrollment is 76. So we've got people that are really spanning sort of age ranges and levels of experience.
Yeah, I try to get all my nieces and my grand uncles and I'm involved in the course.
Rent a crowd.
That's right. Okay, guys. So it's that time now. So I'm going to admit people into the session, and then probably within 1 minute or so, we will begin. Hello and welcome to everyone. We trust that this message finds you well, and we are joining you for another installment of our course, An Examination of COVID-19, offered by St. George's University. Now, this live session is part of our ongoing series of monthly updates for this course. But when this course first began in March 5th to be exact, we began with 4 modules. And with each passing day, week, and month, the course have been evolving as it relates to the global experience of COVID-19. Currently, the world and your respective countries and regions are involved in discussions, in planning, and possibly implementing a phasing out of the social distancing, physical distancing, and lockdown policies that have been developed and applied to the response to COVID-19. For this live panel, we would like to focus on where the world is, where we are, and we have examples of panel experts to share their individual case studies from different countries, but also to engage all of us in the conversation on moving on, not necessarily beyond COVID-19, but maybe even moving on with COVID-19 as well. Today, we have, as part of our live panel discussion, Dr. Sandra Vokaty. Dr. Sandra Vokaty has significant international experience with international health organizations and is currently located as the World Health Organization's lead for infectious diseases in India. We have with us Dr. Siriluk Pichainarongk, Professor of Business and Management at Kasetsart University in Thailand. And interestingly, Thailand was the second country after China to report cases of COVID-19. So they were very early in this pandemic. So it will be very interesting to see from a country that was early in this pandemic, how they have responded and are planning to respond as well. We have with us Dr. Calum Macpherson, Professor and Dean for Graduate Studies at St. George's University, a microbiologist and an epidemiologist, which are two particular key areas in the response to COVID-19. And as a research scientist, we really want to engage the science, not necessarily just on COVID-19, but the science that is required for consideration in moving forward. And we have with us Professor Antonia MacDonald, Professor of Humanities. And that is particularly important because what COVID-19 have allowed us to emphasize is that health is interconnected. It's interconnected with business, it's interconnected with science, it's interconnected with economy, and it's interconnected with society. So we bring in that conversation about how society and culture is involved and is required to participate in moving forward. So Dr. MacDonald will certainly bring that significant element to our panel discussion as well. So as we begin, a couple of housekeeping announcements. We have initial comments from our panel members, and we will continue to gain from the expertise and experiences, but we certainly want to invite you, this is your live session, to interact and engage with us. You can do so through many modalities. You can raise your hand and we can identify your raised hand and open up your audio, open up your video to share with us your questions, your comments, etc. And you can also engage with us in the chat box at the same time. So feel free to share your questions or comments, and we will certainly try at least to accommodate as much as possible within the 90-minute time frame. Well, it's 85 minutes remaining. So with that in mind, I would like to begin by welcoming and thanking our panel members. And first of all, I'd like to request for Dr. Sandra Vokaty, WHO's lead for infectious diseases in India, to share with us WHO's perspective as it relates to what are some of their guidelines, what are some of the recommendations for the authorities, for countries, for the world at large in moving on from this COVID-19 lockdown. Dr. Vokaty.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Badesi. Hello, of course. It's very nice to connect with you again. It is 6:35 where I am in New Delhi, and it's been a very long week and a very long day. So I must admit I'm feeling a bit tired. This COVID has really taken a lot out of our team so I work in the WHO country office in India. And as Satish said, I'm the team leader for communicable diseases. It's quite a big team here in India. And many of our field staff, as I said in my earlier presentation in this course, all of our field staff have been repurposed for COVID containment and response, COVID surveillance. You know, they've participated in rapid response teams to do the cluster containment. One thing that, you know, obviously the epidemic has evolved over the last 3 months or so, and we were doing very well in the beginning. Now we're not doing so well. getting a lot of cases every day. What we're finding very challenging is the slum areas of the big cities, Mumbai, New Delhi, Chennai. There's very densely populated areas where physical distancing is just not possible. You know, you have many, many people living in a small space. We heard about, last week, we heard about a slum in the northern part of New Delhi. It was a house with 160 people living in it. It's a very big house with 60 rooms, but only 4 toilets, yeah? And 50 of the 160 people had COVID. So, you know, what do you do in a situation like that? It's very challenging. And, you know, as our representative likes to say, this is a whole new infection and we're building the boat while we sail it. Every week, you know, this whole challenge, for example, of asymptomatic infection, people spreading the virus who are not, you know, do not have symptoms, is very, very challenging. So, you know, in our office, we're fever screened every morning when we come in and all that kind of thing, but we could still be infected, right? Without an actual test, you don't know. But what we're learning to call these people now is pre-symptomatic, because a lot of them eventually do develop some symptoms, but in the early stages, you don't know. You don't know that they're infected. So it's a very challenging virus to try to contain. And one thing we're becoming increasingly concerned about is not just our people have been repurposed, but almost the whole public health system has been repurposed to work on the COVID, but we still need to maintain essential services. You know, essential health services. Women are still having babies. There's still non-communicable diseases. There's still, you know, a lot of, in India, disease elimination programs going on, tuberculosis, neglected tropical diseases. And if those people are all working on COVID, what's going to happen to the essential services? So it's a real balancing act every day to try to figure out what is top priority today. If we let this go, what will be the net effect on public health? So, you know, it's been very challenging. So the situation right now in India, we're about 8 weeks into lockdown. Our latest lockdown will expire on Sunday, which is the 17th. We really don't know what the next phase will look like. This last 2 weeks, it's been based on zones. So we have green zones that either have no cases or very few, and we have orange zones, which are, you know, moderately bad clusters and so on. And then we have red zones. And unfortunately, the whole of New Delhi is a red zone. So we didn't have any lifting of the lockdown measures in New Delhi where I live. Other states, you know, are doing much better. Some states are doing worse. The Maharashtra, Mumbai is very bad right now, very, very bad. So because it's such a vast country, it makes sense to take a zoned approach to the lockdown, lifting the lockdown and so on. But there's still a lot of uncertainty as to, you know, what the next phase of it is going to look like, because the economic impact has been very devastating. There, you know, all the businesses have been closed for 8 weeks. And for a small business, a lot of them probably will not be able to reopen. So, I wanted to talk a little bit more like about the economic impact globally and locally here in India of COVID. Some of the unanticipated consequences that we're seeing. So, you know, the whole world is in recession. I think there is no, you know, controversy about that, and it's going to be in recession for a while. The governments are coming out with these big economic stimulus packages and social protection programs and so on, including India. But, you know, how effective are they going to be? It's really too soon to tell. I think the people that are suffering the most are definitely the poor, the people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. We're seeing a second wave of migration right now in India because there was some lifting of the movement restrictions in this 2-week phase of the lockdown. So we've had millions of people on the move within India, again, going from the big cities where they've lost their employment to the states where they're from, because, you know, they don't have to pay a rent there, their families will take care of them, but they're walking, you know, some of them are walking hundreds of kilometers. We had a case this week of a woman who gave birth by the side of the highway and then had to walk another over 100 kilometers to get help. So it's been, very, very difficult for India, and not just on the health side, but definitely on the economic side. But going back, many economists are saying that the COVID has reversed globalization. Countries are becoming more protectionist, especially with their medical equipment and pharmaceutical products and so on. They're holding on to them. They're not allowing them to go. There's not a lot of solidarity in the world around all the inputs that you need for a good healthcare system in COVID. So I think looking at the long-term post-lockdown, we have to look at how the risk is going to be managed and what are going to be the consequences. There's a lot of unemployment in the world. I mean, everybody knows this. Even the U.S., Canada are facing, Europe, a lot of unemployment created by the recession and the lockdown. And so overall, people will decrease their spending. There's less money coming in. And because of the unemployment and the countries are going to have a shrinking tax base for a while. And they have to increase their public sector spending for these economic stimulus packages and social protection programs and so on. So there'll be a net contraction of the economy, right? There's going to be increased deficits, increased debt, all that sort of thing. And what's that going to look like? How long is that going to last? And is it going to translate into political change in countries that are soon having elections, like the United States, like Trinidad and Tobago is having? I was living in Trinidad before I came here. The other thing, in oil-based economies like Trinidad and Tobago, where the price of oil has crashed because the demand has totally disappeared, like how are they going to do their public sector, find the money to do the public sector spending that needs to be done to stimulate the economy? I'm not too sure. So, which industries have been hardest hit and which ones have done better? Travel and tourism has disappeared for now, and it's going to take a very long time, I think, for travel and tourism to come back. Very difficult to do physical distancing on a plane, is what I understand. And people are afraid to travel because the virus is still spreading. So I think that's going to be a very long recovery period. Retail, food service, hospitality industries are going to have, a tough time, I think, to recover. How do you do physical distancing in a retail outlet, places like that? The growth sectors right now are e-commerce, obviously. Here you can get anything delivered in India, not just Amazon. You can get furniture, you can get food, and that has pretty much continued for essential commodities. I think IT is doing very well, particularly those that have done innovation for teleworking and things like that. And then obviously the medical inputs that are needed for COVID, those have done very well. The PPE and the ventilators and the pharmaceuticals that are needed for COVID, those are booming. I think national security, the public sector is important in a situation like this, and a lot of definitely the public health sector is very, very busy, and I think the national security sector is very busy. The disaster management authorities, the military, and so on are very busy. Somebody else will speak about education, but I'm interested in seeing what will be the net effect of all this e-learning. Like here in my building here in India, there's a 5-year-old little girl, and obviously all the schools are closed, and she's expected to sit in front of a computer and I don't think a 5-year-old can do e-learning all day. I don't think it's possible. And obviously the poor are not going to have the internet and the laptops and everything that are required. So there'll be a very uneven impact, I would say, on education. And again, the richer countries, the richer students, will have access to the e-learning and so on. But at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale, that's just not possible, you know. So I think that'll be something to watch. And are they going to lose the whole school year? Are they going to have to repeat? I don't know. And I'm sure other people probably have better ideas than I do. I think looking forward, with respect to risk management, masks are going to be here to stay. I think physical distancing in the workplace and everywhere are going to be very important. Workplaces will have to be reconfigured in order to incorporate these risk management measures of physical distancing. And I think the teleworking is going to be here to stay. I think there'll be a lot more of that, a lot more virtual meetings rather than physical meetings. I think, you know, e-conferences, all that sort of thing are going to carry on for quite a while. I mean, we expect this COVID to be around in India for 18 months to 2 years. Not that it'll be a roaring epidemic for that time, but we will have to deal with the virus for a very long time. I mean, it does depend quite a bit on when the vaccine becomes available and how good the vaccine is. Perhaps, you know, we can develop herd immunity much more quickly if the vaccine comes out soon. And is, you know, WHO is running a solidarity trial. I think there are 80 groups working on vaccine development around the world. And some of it looks very promising. So, you know, I don't want to predict when the vaccine will be available. We're hoping, you know, as soon, like this year, hoping maybe September, October, the vaccine could be made available. And that will make a huge difference in, you know, the epidemic, obviously. Or is it going to be something we just learn to live with, like we did with Zika and chikungunya and all that? But I do think that vaccine development looks very promising. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about this migrant laborer thing, which is very big in India. But it is in other places too, like in I'm Canadian. In Canada, there were 2 meat plants that had to close because the labor was imported. Was in one plant, it was from the Philippines, and the problem was the housing. These people were being put in this sort of very, you know, dense, like dormitory type housing, and they were infecting each other, had a huge outbreak, had to close the plant. So housing is really important and needs to be considered, I think, in the future with respect to risk management. Like, what's going to happen with mass gatherings, with sports events and cultural events and things like that, where physical distancing is going to be difficult or impossible? Is it that everything now is just going to be on the internet and live streamed? I don't know. Like, how many people will pay for that? Is this going, because sports is huge, right? These big sporting events in all this football and everything in Europe, and baseball and hockey in Canada generate a huge amount of money. I'm not convinced that the experience is the same to just watch it on TV or watch it on live stream. So what will be the net effect on these cultural events, sports events? I think it could take a while for that to come back. What we're hearing here in India, like yesterday and today, I was on a very interesting virtual meeting between India's National AIDS Control, NACO, National AIDS Control Organization, and transgender groups. And these social protections that are being, you know, the Prime Minister is promoting and saying he's taking care of the poor, they're not reaching those people. You know, they were very angry. So the people, there's a lot of hard to reach populations out there that are not getting enough to eat, that are not getting work. You know, so I am very concerned about these very vulnerable communities and how the virus is really affecting them, and how these social protection nets or services are not reaching them. These vulnerable communities are the hardest hit, and there will be, you know, very serious, not just health consequences, but long-term consequences. So I think there'll be greater demands on international donors, because as I already said, a lot of these countries will now have to go into debt, go into deficit to try to, you know, address not just the health problem, but the economic problems, the social problems. So I think there'll be a very important role of the international donors, the international organizations, to step up and help, particularly developing countries. And greater demands will be placed on them, but also on civil society organizations, community-based organizations, especially in developing countries. I feel very strongly that all countries now need to increase their investment in public health and in healthcare and build the resiliency of their healthcare systems. This has been shown even in Europe, even in the United States, that they just couldn't cope. You know, they were overwhelmed very quickly, and hopefully the takeaway will be invest and build the resilience of your public health systems. There have been a few unanticipated positive impacts, I would say, and I'm sure you're all familiar with these. Delhi is known for its air pollution. I mean, it's really bad. Satish will corroborate this. The air pollution in New Delhi is one of the worst in the world. And the air is very clean now because there's no cars on the road, there's no planes in the air, people are just not moving around. So there's very few emissions. So that, you know, there's more birds around. Environmentally, it's been quite, you know, good, but I don't think it'll take long to reverse that in New Delhi. I was reading today that because of the cleaner environment in Europe, they're promoting cycling all over Europe. And also they don't want people taking buses and cars. And so to improve public health and fitness and all that, there is a lot of programs to promote bicycling to work and things like that, which is, you know, if people take that up, that would be very good for public health and fitness. I think, you know, being locked up home, for me for the last 8 weeks, apart from going to work, has sort of, people have returned to a simpler life and less consumerism, because there's just nothing to buy out there except groceries right now in India. So I think that's a good thing, and I'm happy to see that you have somebody who's going to talk about values later. I think one of the nicest things has been the sort of community solidarity going on in the world, and sort of empathy for people who are, for example, in seniors' homes, and, you know, calling them, bringing them food, that kind of thing, has been, you know, there's this movement in I know in North America and perhaps in other countries called care mongering now, where people have been reaching out to total strangers to try to connect with them, to you know, reduce loneliness, and people are sewing masks when there was the big shortage of masks. You know, people were sewing them at home for healthcare workers. Restaurants were cooking, you know, food for healthcare workers and the poor. So there have been some very nice consequences of this, you know, terrible emergency, which has been more community empathy and caring. So with that, I want to close my little, maybe it was too long, but these are my views. These are not WHO views as such, but these are what I have observed in the last 8 to 12 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vokaty. And what your sharing emphasizes is that moving on, it has to be a coordinated and a multidisciplinary interprofessional approach as well, because every sector of our lives, our personal lives, our professional lives, and society and economy, and especially health, have been affected as well. So thank you very much for sharing those perspectives as well. We'd like to actually remain within the Asian continent for now. We have with us Dr. Siriluk Pichainarongk. And Dr. Pichainarongk, from your perspective, both at the level of Kasetsart University as a university, what are some of the considerations that your university is bearing in mind as it relates to moving on with your term, with your academic year, with your calendar year as well? And secondly, what is the Thailand context, and what are some of the measures that Thailand is using to proceed away from the lockdown that was implemented?
Thank you, Dr. Satish. Okay, the first question is about my university. It's a Kasetsart University. We have a full campus around in the Thailand. We have more than 10,000 students allowed in Thailand. And the last 2 months, that's when in the Bangkok is a lockdown. It means the Kasetsart is the main campus in the Bangkok is have to close, and includes about the faculty is stay at home to work at home, and includes me as well. And then we are meeting really often about what we going on. If in the July the COVID is not gone yet, what the Kasetsart were doing. And then we have to study online with the student, and we start on this summer. Now in Thailand is a summer term in the Kasetsart. Now we study in the online, and we will have start the first term in the July, and maybe we are still have the online course for the student is a half of the term. Yeah, and maybe in the after midterm we will come back to normal. It's like in class, and maybe some class and still the online. Yeah, and what we are prepare a lot of the student is when they're back home, and maybe at the home is not have the internet, and then in Kasetsart is provides about the SIM card is used in like the mobile for the internet for the student to study at home. Is that not have any problem? Yeah, and we plan and we are ready for online course for the student as well. And the situation in Thailand, we started lockdown about 2 months ago. We start first in the Bangkok, and after we close in the Bangkok, it means the worker, a lot of the worker in the Bangkok is moved out from the Bangkok is back in home. And we are really concerned because we have a new case, more than 100 on the early of the April. And then after early of the April, everyone is back home lockdown in the Bangkok, and a lot of the province in Thailand started lockdown as well. And the government is not allow us to move from the province to the province. Everyone stay home. But until right now, the case is reduced. We have a new case is not over 10 cases per day. Especially today, we have a new case, just 7. Yeah, and we have the first day, we open the lockdown, the province, everyone is moved around, I can drive the car across the country and back to work. And next week, we start the second phase. It means some business is come back to reopen. Yeah, the market, the superstore, yeah, and some business, but the hotel still closed. And in Thailand, that that we get the profits a lot from the tourists. When the Thailand is closed, the economic is really affect about the tourists, because every business is an effect from the when we don't have any tourists. I mean they cannot get a lot of the money. It's like the hotel, the vendor. We're thinking about if we don't lock down the country and we still close the airport, because we concerned about the tourists is come to Thailand. Yeah, it's like from the Europe and still the pandemic. Yeah, and the hotel maybe come back to reopen next month for the just only the Thai, yeah, in the country. Yeah, and about the food security in Thailand, not much concern, because we have the paddy field, we have the farm, we produce the foods inside the Thailand, because we the export the foods, and then we don't concern much about the food. Yeah, and the business now is really popular in Thailand is online business. Everything is online. Yeah, you can to order food, even the food, you can order about everything that you want on the internet, and then deliver it to in front of your house. Yeah, it's quite convenient. Yeah, but now we are still to wear the mask and wash the hand when we go out. Yeah, I think in Thailand will be better we hope we will have the Siriluk case soon. Yep, thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Pichainarongk. What is interesting about your comments is that with regards to food security, you guys feel pretty safe. And that's an important consideration because in many parts of the world, a lot of their food is dependent on importation. So that's a very positive position to be in as it relates to being able to produce your own food and to accommodate your population. But I would suspect that while you guys are producing sufficient food, there is a significant part of your food exportation that is compromised as well. So that's also part of the business limitation out of COVID-19. Okay. So thank you very much for that. Dr. Calum Macpherson, from the perspective, many perspectives, I would like to actually engage you in. First of all, what is your understanding about the current context of COVID-19, particularly in the scope of small island communities or states like Grenada, for example, and also as it relates to the epidemiology, as it relates to the science of diagnostics, of testing, of treating? What are some of your current and projected considerations as a result of this broad-based perspective of COVID-19?
Well, thank you, Dr. Badaisi, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this. It's a real pleasure to see our colleagues in India, Thailand, and three of us here in Grenada. And for those viewers who perhaps haven't heard of Grenada, you are forgiven. It's the 12th smallest country in the world. And to date, we've had 21 cases of COVID, most of them imported. We had one small cluster that involved 6 individuals. We've got nobody in the hospital and nobody has died. And if you look at most of the small island developing states, they're in a pretty similar situation. I think one of the things this virus is teaching us is how hyperconnected we all are. From the onset of the pandemic, it took very little time to spread to all the countries in the world. And those countries that haven't reported cases, it might be a political reason for that, or it might be a fact that they don't have the diagnostic capability, or they just haven't reported them. So I wanted to try and frame my comments, Satish, if I may, by looking at how I divide the epidemiology world up. And I divide it up by looking at the macro epidemiology, the big picture. If you take all the almost 200 countries in the world, our ability to make a diagnosis, to collect the data on the number of deaths, the number of infections, is all based on the institutions that we have, the trained personnel, and that goes all the way up to the political desire to have the healthcare that countries need to be able to collect that information. And so some of the countries, take the United States, they even had a pandemic response unit. Unfortunately, it's disbanded a couple of years ago, so it obviously led to the timing of this pandemic. But many people have been predicting this pandemic would be coming along. So our ability to report the infectious diseases or non-communicable diseases depends on the institutions, the trained personnel, and the amount of attention each government pays to it. So some countries in the world don't have the ability to conduct their own tests. The tests have to be sent to other countries. Some countries will have great testing ability. So if we're going to open up, I think we'd all agree there are certain key principles like testing, tracing, contacts, and isolating individuals so that they don't spread it even further. And the whole goal of that is to keep the reproductive number, the R0, less than 1. Because when it's less than 1, it goes towards extinction. When it's greater than 1, it goes towards an epidemic, and that's what we've been seeing. And this whole social distancing is affecting that. So the macro picture is complemented by the microepidemiology, and by that I mean individuals. And that's where a lot of interesting science and the development is taking place at the moment. I have, in my lifetime, never seen the number of publications, pre-publications that are coming out in this field. The whole world and most of the world's scientists are galvanized to looking at this issue. As we heard from Dr. Vokaty, there's 80 vaccine trials going on in different countries in the world. I'm not quite as bullish on the ability to get a vaccine. We never obtained an HIV vaccine. We don't have a COVID vaccine. We have a vaccine against MERS, which is a similar SARS virus in camels, but not in people. So we have made some advances, but I think this is something that we're going to live with for a long time. So in terms of microepidemiology, this is the likelihood of an individual being exposed to the virus. And if they're exposed, do they go on to develop disease? Or do they become pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic, or get serious infection? And if they get a serious infection, do they go on to survive that infection or die? And a lot of those scenarios are predisposed by all the factors that go in to make individuals. We're all different. We differ in our age, in our gender, in our nutritional status, in our genetics. So racial diversities around the world. They're all going to play an important part in determining whether this disease goes on to progress. Our comorbidities. So a lot of these areas have been the attention of many scientists in different places. And the whole of the infection is also dependent on the strains of this virus. COVID viruses don't typically mutate as much as, say, HIV. The mutation rates in HIV were many times greater than we're seeing in the COVID viruses. But we're right at the beginning of this pandemic. I hate to say it, we're closer to the beginning than to the end. It's not even the end of the beginning, I don't think, at the moment. So we're going to have to learn to live with this for a long time. And all those individual attributes are affected by human behavior. So human behavior is the key to our exposure or non-exposure, and how we, do all the behavioral things like washing hands with soap and water, wearing masks, which is going to be incredibly important going forward. I absolutely agree. Social distancing. And this is all predicated under a whole area of socioeconomics. Can we afford a diagnostic test? Can we afford a treatment if it comes along? If a vaccine comes along, can we afford it? Will the governments make it available? So individual and national socioeconomics are going to underpin how each country moves forward and is able to move forward. So I think the areas of diagnosis are very exciting. The real problem is not the sensitivity and specificity of these tests. It's that many countries like Grenada have an incredibly low prevalence. And sensitivity and specificity are properties of diagnostic tests. They don't vary wherever you go. But when you have a low prevalence, the positive predictive value, which is the number of true positives over the number of all positives, the true positives and the false positives times 100%, is incredibly low. So even if you have a 97% specific test, you will find when you've got a 1% prevalence, 80% of your positives are false positive, which is incredibly disappointing. But as the number of people rises and the infection levels increase, we will see that those tests become more and more valuable, and the number of false negatives false positives will fall. Finally, I'd just like to say that there is a lot of work going on looking at various therapies. Remdesivir we've mostly heard of, and that received a lot of attention. It shortens the hospital span, but there are others, and I'd just like to mention a few. Ivermectin, a drug that is used in veterinary medicine and human medicine. It's prevented 35 million people from going blind from river blindness. It's a treatment for lymphatic filariasis. It helps with the treatment of all the gastrointestinal nematodes, not only in humans, but in sheep, cows, pigs, cattle, camels. It is a fantastic drug, but it's been shown to significantly reduce mortality. The other drug that is well known and has received a lot of attention, but so far no double-blind clinical trials, that is hydroxychloroquine, perhaps with zinc, another micronutrient. So hydroxychloroquine has been shown to be very ineffective in hospital cases and serious cases in reducing mortality and even shortening hospital stays. But many people, and they're conducting these trials now in the United States and various other places, and we'll see the results come out in the next few weeks, Satish, where I think you will find that prophylactic use very early on, it's a very good antiviral. It sort of opens up the cells, allows zinc in, and it stops the virus replicating. So like ivermectin, it has antiviral properties. So I think the world will move ahead and open up at this time. Obviously, it's more of a political decision than a health decision. It's an economic decision. It's incredibly complicated. But the science is moving ahead at a pace we've rarely seen. We were shared this genome from China within weeks. So people were able to make diagnostic tests, people were able to start on vaccine trials, and there's a lot of promise in the therapeutic area that we shouldn't overlook. So I think it's not all bleak, but I think like other viruses, like the H1N1 that caused the Spanish flu outbreak in 1918, 1919, these viruses tend to become less pathogenic, we hope, over time, and we learn to live with them, and they hopefully will become a seasonal influenza-like infection that we live with going forward. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Macpherson. I have a question for you as a follow-up. So in your career thus far, I mean, you would have worked and lived in many countries across many regions in the world, and you would have had to respond to various examples of tropical infectious diseases as well. Based on those previous experiences, how would you rate this experience of COVID-19 thus far in terms of your own personal, especially professional experience, and in terms of, are there any lessons that we would have learned in the past that can really be applied to COVID-19, especially from going forward?
Right. I'm actually old enough to remember when I was working in Kenya when the HIV was emerging. It wasn't known what was causing it. We didn't know how it was transmitted. I participated in many of the studies in Nairobi on transmission data with a number of very eminent people in the field. And I remember the discussions at that time when it was discovered that it was a virus, that we would be able to develop a vaccine for this very quickly. And the optimism was there. There would soon be treatments, and now here we are, many decades later, and we do have great treatments. Now it's more of a chronic infection, and so the advances were made more on treatments, but we never developed a vaccine for it. And so the emphasis, I think, on vaccines and the hope for vaccines, these viruses are incredibly difficult to produce a vaccine against. I know there's probably more effort around the world. I think what would help, and I know there is a philanthropic global group, and I've forgotten the name of the group, because vaccines are also driven by multinationals and profits. We need to have a global group, and there is one, that will develop a vaccine preemptively for other, because this won't be the last pandemic we face. This is, there will be other pandemics, hopefully not very soon. If we wait another 100 years, everybody who's listening probably won't mind if that happens. But no, this is, from my experience, it's like HIV in that it's become global, it's become a focus of attention, it's going to be the focus of every conference, every newscast, every newspaper article, and that happened in the 50s and 60s. It was malaria, and then it was schistosomiasis when a lot of money went into it, and then it focused on HIV, and now it's certainly on COVID for the next decade or so.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Dr. Macpherson. And one of your comments spoke about the relevance of human behavior in all of this, and that's a very nice segue to engage Dr. Antonia MacDonald now, Professor of Humanities. And we really want to understand the context of COVID-19 currently, but also prospectively as it relates to how society as a whole, and also how traditional cultures and values are being affected and need to be managed going forward as well.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Satish, for inviting me to participate in this discussion. As everybody has said, I think we need to understand and recognize that what we're in currently is a social recession. We're in an economic recession, yes, but we're also in a social recession. And what most of you have said already is that COVID-19 is going to be with us for a long time. So I think that part of the challenge we have is how to live with this virus. And I want us to emphasize the word live, because we have to go about our daily lives with it. Right now we're in quarantine or self-isolation, lockdown. We're unable to go to our workplaces. We're unable to go to school, to conferences, to churches, to bars, you name it. We're not allowed to line physically with our friends, but we need that. Right? And when we go out, you're asking us to maintain social distance, to wear masks. None of these practices are coming naturally to us. So yes, it sounds like a tale of woe and doom. Where do we go? And the despair is there. It is mounting. People are saying, I don't care anymore. I just want to let me out of this. Let me live and let me die if I have to. So what I'm thinking of is, when in a crisis like that, social interaction having to be recalibrated. And we've seen that. We've seen the positives and we've seen the negatives. But what is at stake in this pandemic is the loss of what the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, he talks about social capital. And with the loss of social capital, we have the loss of social trust. So let me explain what I mean by social capital. And I don't want to sound all sociology, because this concept, by the way, has been there for a while. It's been there since antiquity. But what it is, and what sociologists have tweaked it to mean, is the collective value of all social networks. the norms of reciprocities that arise out of these networks. So these are the networks that we form with our communities, with our neighbors, with each other. They give value to our lives, and they encourage us to trust and cooperate with each other. And we are seeing that, because what we're seeing is also the demise of social trust, the belief in honesty, integrity, reliability, all these things that are core. And this erosion of social trust, we see it most prevalently at the level of families. I mean, there are increasing, the statistics are frightening. Sheltering in place, there's a failure of those who have been entrusted to protect and to nurture. You have domestic violence on the increase, sexual abuse on the increase. We have tales of alcohol abuse, drug abuse. As unemployment increases, the number of suicides are going up. So yes, these stories are everywhere. And we know that government welfare services are galvanizing their resources to deal with this. But as Dr. Vokaty has said, we have many cases, instances of caremongering. And I want to make that point because, you know, there has been a study that says that with pandemics, you lose social trust. And they were using the pandemic of 1918, the Spanish influenza, and talking about how it became, that loss became generational. And yeah, that is a little scary, but I am wanting to talk back to these studies to say that in the 21st century, the globalized 21st century, we have different and no less powerful avenues for creating social capital and social trust. And so I feel that I want to look at human behavior in the virus, in the pandemic now. I mean, we've seen all kinds of stories. We've seen stories of caring. We've seen communities rise to the challenge. We've seen the poor suffer because of it. We've seen governments not being attentive to the realities of the poor when they ask us to shelter in place when we are an outside culture, for example. So people want to be outside, they want to be on the block, they want to go visiting people. They're not going to stay home. They're going to be on the road. What do we do? And I was thinking that maybe as the scientists are looking for the vaccine, maybe the sociologists should be looking at helping with strategies that are going to allow us to live with it. And I see that happening already. I see it happening on the individual level. And you know, Satish, you asked me to speak about music, a culture, and I thought I should speak about music. I want to reference Bob Marley. One good thing about music, when it hits, you feel no pain. Hit me with music. And that's what's happening in the world. We are being hit with music. There has been an upsurge in that kind of musical creativity. We've seen, in fact, the musical collaboration where, Lady Gaga has curated it, where we have the concert, that One World Together at Home concert, where she has brought in megastars like Taylor Swift, John Legend, Celine Dion, Andrea Bocelli. We've seen that. We've seen even on a Caribbean level, the production of We Got This, a musical song. We have ex-tempo songs, we have COVID songs, we have calypso songs, we have gospel choir. We had, in fact, the symphony orchestra in March, the Rotterdam Philharmonic Orchestra, virtually staging Beethoven's Ode to Joy, with 19 musicians playing their individual parts from their homes. And I'm signaling that because I'm thinking that we can take courage from that. We can take courage from the rather mundane picture of people in apartment buildings singing outside their window, singing choruses together in Italy. And these are the stories that we're going to have to hold on to and hold firmly on to, because despair is going to creep in. And as you say, the mental health situation is rapidly deteriorating. I also want us to look at So we talked about how the stories of nature regenerating herself during this pandemic. There have been many stories, the cleaner air, as Dr. Vokaty said, the return of butterflies, people have noticed, and hummingbirds. And I want to use this as a metaphor to say that in a lot of ways, our societies are our communities are also being regenerated. It was Jose Marti, the Cuban poet and philosopher, who said, in a time of crisis, the peoples of the world must rush to get to know each other. And we see that happening on social media. And I was really fascinated to see, and yes, I know that we all don't have equal access to it. We, and people have talked about the fact that there's a digital divide and it seems to be widening. But I want to say the things that we have are working. That there are new kinds of communities, new ways of sharing that are being promulgated, more traffic on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. And I mean both in terms of quantity and quality. Because for example, before you used to have cooking shows and cooking programs, yoga, aerobics classes being done on YouTube and Instagram. Now they are being done live. So for those who need that connection and who have access to that connection, it is one way of keeping families together, of keeping people together. And I'm looking in fact at the trickle-down effect, because if those who have the means can remain sane, remain healthy, and I mean psychologically healthy, then they are also going to be resources that can help the less able in the community. So church groups, people who are collecting baskets of food for the poor, etc. And the challenge now is for us to learn how to be innovative. People have talked endlessly that crises and opportunities. It's a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. How do we make this into an opportunity? It is likely, it is very likely that in June, people are going to open their borders. Hotels are going to want to get back into business. We are so heavily tourist dependent that we need for the economy to be galvanized. So I'm asking, maybe the time has come for us to think of how to vacation while on quarantine, because that might be the reality, right? Now you will ask, why should I travel if it means being quarantined for 14 days? But maybe staycations, where you stay at home, you stay in your country, that might become trendier, right? The tourism industry is going to have to be more ingenious in how they package the product, because leisure is important to our well-being. So what we might have to think about, all countries, is how we are going to redo this thing. It cannot be business as usual. So when I talk about is the opportunities, an opportunity for creativity, for thinking outside the box. And I was listening to Dr. Macpherson talking about the vaccine. I was thinking, yes, there's going to be a vaccine, but while we wait for the vaccine, maybe different people could be doing different things. We are going to be wearing masks for a long time. Maybe there might be ways to create very efficacious masks, cheaper masks, right? How a more comfortable mask, some people are arguing. So who is going to devote some time to this, right? We are going to have lots more outdoor activities. Who is going to devote time to creating remote guides or apps that are similar to those that you get in the museum so that you can use it? Because this is a global thing. All of us, we are seeing more traffic. How do we set up social distancing in parks, right? So I'm just thinking that it was Paulo Freire who said, if men are unable to perceive critically the themes of their time and thus intervene actively in reality, they are carried along in the waters of change. But if they see that times are changing, then they need to be submerged in that change so that they can discern its dramatic significance. And I'm thinking, this is the opportunity. I cannot reside in gloom and doom. I'm already locked in here. I don't need to be emotionally locked in. So what I think that this whole pandemic has given us is an opportunity for us to emerge out of ourselves into this new reality and reshape it, because in the end, we have to take control of our lives. I sound like a preacher. I'm sorry.
I think that was quite thought-provoking, but also quite therapeutic as well, especially in the context of how we are to consider this aspect of COVID-19 beyond the economy, beyond our own health indicators as well, and recognize that it has a profound effect on our intrinsic quality of that of being human as well. So that is quite profound. And I think that is probably going to be one of the more significant arguments as it relates to how individuals, populations, how authorities are going to posture themselves in proceeding in the post-lockdown phase for COVID-19. So thank you guys very much. I'm already receiving responses from our audience that they want a copy or transcript of this. Please know that the session is recorded and this discussion will be made available in the course as well. We have a couple of questions and comments that came out in the meantime in the chat box that I would actually like to refer to. And the first question that emerged, and it's a question that's out there in society, is it too early? Too early for what? Too early to reopen. Reopen in the context of not having a vaccine or not having definitive types of diagnostics or definitive types of treatment. So the question is it too early? So that's one question, but that question is also balanced or counterbalanced in a sense with another question, which says that while we are still unsure about vaccine or diagnostics or testing, we also have to bear in mind that there is a health cost of COVID-19, but there's also the health cost of things like extreme hunger as well. So maybe Dr. Macpherson, you can probably share your thoughts on that, especially as it relates to, is it too early to open in the context of not having definitive understanding and tools as it relates to vaccine, as it relates to testing, as it relates to treating?
It's an incredibly difficult question because so many of the questions we'd like to know, answers we'd like to know about COVID, we just don't know yet. We don't know how long immunity lasts. We don't know if you get infected with one strain, are you susceptible to another? We don't know the long-term implications of morbidity on those that got infected. I think we've all seen recently it's very rare, but this, I think it was given a name yesterday, the multiple inflammatory syndrome in children. This very rare Kawasaki type disease that is showing up in a number of children in the United States. We do know from China that a lot of the people who get infected have long-term morbidities. So just to say that this is a virus that you get and 80% of people get over it without any symptoms may not in fact turn out to be true. So how cautious can we be? I think it's an impossible question, and I think this is probably the most difficult time for any politician to make these decisions, or in the United States, it's the governors, to open up or to keep businesses closed. People need to make a livelihood. And there's going to be a balance between the ability to earn a livelihood or to avoid infection from this virus. And that balance is going to come down to an individual choice. And I think the non-pharmaceutical interventions that we've talked about are going to be just as important as any of the pharmaceutical interventions that might come into play down the road. So is it too early? When is too early? I know Winston Churchill said, the further back you can look, the further forward you're likely to be able to see. Unfortunately, with this pandemic, it's so new. We still have so many unanswered questions that we will only know whether we're doing the right thing by opening up, by trying to get the economies going and having more people exposed. I think the Swedish model gives us a lot of hope. In Sweden, yes, they've had a slightly higher death rate than in other Scandinavian countries, but they tried to protect vulnerable people and tried to have those that were less vulnerable have as normal a life as they could. It's not normal. There are all the non-pharmaceutical interventions going on in Sweden, but they are trying to match a little bit of an economic livelihood attainment with the trying to protect those that should be protected. Whether that's going to be the model, or is it like Belarus that really didn't close down anything? They have sporting events. So one of the things that we do have in our global pandemic is models of different behaviors, different political decisions in every country. And that will give us a picture 6 months to a year from now, where we'll be able to think, yes, that was a right decision. If I may just say, it's the same with our universities. And I know Kasetsart in Thailand is not having classes till January. And nor is Harvard Medical School and California State University, which is the largest student body in the United States, 400,000 students, they're not returning until January. So this online experience is going to be with us for a while. Is that a good thing? We just don't know at this point in time.
Certainly a lot of questions, good questions, but unanswered questions at this point in time. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. Dr. Pichainarongk, I would like to gain a contextual perspective of how social cultural changes are actually occurring in Thailand context. So you mentioned that Thailand is in a phase process of emerging out of the lockdown. So you guys are in phase 1, for example. How does that look? How does it look in terms of a social perspective, especially from a densely populated city like Bangkok to a rural community like, let's say, for example, Suphanburi? How is that playing out in the same country, but with same regulations and guidelines, but different social and cultural realities?
Okay, thank you for the question. In Thailand, we don't concern much about the rural area, because the case that we have is always happen in the urban, is like the Bangkok, and or in the Phuket, or in the Chiang Mai. It's like the country is have a lot of the tourists or have the international airport. And then the rural area is not much to adjust after the COVID or the moving forward, because is right now in Thailand, a lot of the province in Thailand is quite back to the normal. Yeah, everyone is back to work. Yeah, only in the Bangkok or in the big city in like the Chiang Mai or the Phuket is not normal yet. They still control the people to entrance or go out, because it's like the Phuket. It's like the Phuket is a big country. A lot of the tourists is the first destination to the Phuket, and we still have some of the tourists cannot to travel back the country yet, stay in the Phuket. And then we have a lot of the worker is move around the Thailand to work in the Phuket, because they have in the Phuket is have a lot of the hotel and tourist business a lot. And when they close, they don't allow the people in the Phuket is go out, because we're concerned about it will to get the virus and back home. Yeah, and in the Phuket is really a lot of the work hard to test a lot of the people, and the found people is a positive. And after we quarantine all of them in 14, the Phuket it just opened the province and last week and allow the people is back home. Yeah. And I think in Thailand, not concerned much to be about to change a bit the culture. I think in Thailand is change the culture before the COVID. Everything is pushed to be the online. It's like the purchase online, sell online, or activity, everything in online before the COVID. It's like is the raising everyone to use about the online a lot. It's like you transfer your money on the online, use a lot of application or do everything from the online. Yeah.
Thailand is a traditionally Buddhist country.
Yeah.
And in terms of Buddhist practices, in terms of temple activities, etc., a lot of these traditions require a lot of social contact as well. What are some of the adjustments that would have had to be made from that particular traditional cultural context for Buddhist practices and values?
The culture, we still do the activity in the temple, or every activity about the Buddhism, we still do it. But we have a day off. A lot in Thailand is involved about the Buddha Day. Yeah, and every time that we have a day off of Buddha Day, it means that a lot of people is to go to the temple and to do the activity. And it's like that we know that we should to stop to go, because we don't to transmission about the virus or anything. Yeah, but they have the people still go to the temple. Yeah.
So the norms of Buddhist traditions are still being maintained, even in spite of some of the restrictions that are being put in place.
Yeah, even the monk is use the mask as well. Okay. Yeah.
And I would imagine that there are restrictions or regulations in terms of numbers for congregation, etc. as well. Yeah. Okay. I'd like to invite, thank you for that, Dr. Pichainarongk. Please, anyone who would like to raise your hand to join in the audio and our video as well, feel free to interact with our panel. As you can appreciate, we have a panel of a very diverse but significantly experienced and expert panel on this particular topic. So please feel free to engage us. As I explore the chat box again, we do have a couple other questions. And one of the questions that came out has to do with the whole treatment modality. And there's a comment about acquiring antibodies that's produced in the body of an infected person and studying that more, or utilizing that practice more in terms of how we can gain therapeutic practices and therapeutic regimen from that. How widely adopted is this approach? So maybe Dr. Macpherson, you can refer to that question, the use of antibodies from previously infected individuals.
Well, the so-called plasma treatment and use of people who have been infected previously, who've developed antibodies, and you use that to treat other people. It has its place. It's certainly been investigated. The problem with all of these treatments is that the double-blind clinical trials are just really in their infancy. They've been going on now for about 2 months in various parts of the world, and the answers to those questions are going to come out in the near future. I think all the trials on hydroxychloroquine, the early giving of hydroxychloroquine, those double-blind clinical trials, I think will be out in about 2 weeks' time. So there's a lot of work on various therapies, from antibody treatments all the way through to various interventions that are being developed. Until we have double-blind clinical trials, you're really not sure. Just because of the heterogeneity of every single patient, what works in one individual doesn't work in another individual, and then you don't understand why. But you've got to get the bigger picture from a larger trial, and those are being conducted, and the answers to those questions will be known in a few months' time.
All right, thank you for that. Dr. Vokaty, a question that emerged, and this question has to do with India's efforts at repatriation. Now, India has undergone a lot of efforts in repatriation from the beginning of the pandemic, but more recently, especially within the past week or so, there have been a lot of planning and a lot of flights, essentially, to repatriate Indian citizens back to India. With regards to repatriation as an activity for many countries, especially as countries begin to relax their borders, one of the initial stage of travel may heavily be focused on repatriation. citizens that may have been caught within the borders of a particular country that seek to return. What are some of the considerations India is putting in place, as well as what considerations other countries in the world with regards to how they should treat with the issue of repatriation, and what are some of the measures that may be needed to mitigate the impacts of importing COVID-19 by virtue of repatriation?
Oops. Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, many countries in the world are in the process of repatriating their citizens. I mean, I'm a Canadian and I receive emails almost every day from the Canadian High Commission here in India. They have repatriation flights going back to Canada just about every day. And do I want to get in the queue to get on the waiting list for those? So I think for all countries, you know, there is obviously a risk that you're bringing in the virus. And so what India is doing and Canada and other countries is they put the people in quarantine, whether it's an actual quarantine facility or it's home quarantine varies a bit. And the people have to be there for 2 weeks because the incubation period, at least 2 weeks. Some countries it's 3 weeks because of the incubation period. And then they're tested. And they need to test negative before they can be released from the quarantine restrictions. So yeah, those are the basic measures that are risk management measures to prevent the virus spreading in the community. I mean, in India, foreigners have been banned since I think about the 24th of March. People could not come in. So they were trying to turn off the source of incoming virus while they dealt with the virus they already have in the country. So yes, many countries have invoked these measures with their returning nationals because by law, you cannot deny citizens access to their country, or not forever. You know, you do have to take them back.
Exactly, and a lot of us are sort of, a lot of us in terms of native citizens in a particular country are a bit concerned about that. Whether it's their own citizens that's coming from a foreign country or even international persons as well. But invariably that would probably be the first level of international travel that will occur. And that's certainly for the health systems and the governments to pay cognizance of as well, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just looking at the chat box again, but in case anyone else have any questions, you can feel free to raise your hand, join us by audio, video as well. In terms of the whole aspect now of a vaccine 1 year, well, the timeline is variable, but we're thinking about 1 year, 18 months, 2 years down the line as well. Persons are thinking based on that particular timeline, then how long, I mean, this is of course is a not difficult question because a lot of what we know about COVID-19, we know based on only current experiences, and we will continue to learn because this is an evolving process along the way. But the question is, while we are projecting a vaccine, what happens in the event that there's no vaccine? What are some of the population-based dynamics? What are some of the viral dynamics that will have to play out in the absence of a vaccine going forward 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now as well? I think that may be our final item to sort of consider, and then we will wrap up the session. So if I can get your feedback, guys, on in the absence of a vaccine or even effective treatment, etc., how will this play out long term? Again, we do not know. And the preface to this conversation is that what we indicate and opinions are just based on current context, which is certainly likely to change as well. But that is an underlying question that people have in their minds right now.
So maybe I think we should look at best practices. And if I may say, New Zealand has been fantastic in their response. And one of the things that, as you just were talking about, repatriation, tourists coming in, and their policies seem to have worked incredibly well. There are a lot of things to learn. If a country the size of New Zealand, you know, 4 million, nearly 5 million people today can really get their policies together so they can open up as much as they are doing now. I think there's a lot that we can learn from the success stories in those countries. The problem is those success stories like Germany, South Korea, and other places where the virus might be coming back. So we have to learn to live with it. I loved Professor MacDonald's statement at staycations. Yeah. I know that I've got to start planting a garden, so I might be able to enjoy my time here at home a little bit more than perhaps I was doing previously. So I think Antonia hit it right on the head, where we've got to look and enjoy what we have. I'm very buoyed by the whole internet revolution where we can do this sort of communication. We're not so isolated as we were before we had this ability to use free communications to talk to each other and to learn from each other. And we're learning very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Professor MacDonald, from the context of society and culture going forward, even long term, and potentially in the absence of a vaccine, what are your likely projections for society and even behaviors?
Okay, I'll first tell you what my dream is.
Sure.
My dream is that we would collaborate more internationally. We would learn from each other. We would learn best practices. I am particularly caught by the fact that in the Caribbean, we think we're the only people in the tourism business, but there are a lot of countries who are now considering how to open. So we should be part of those conversations. You know, what's happening in Europe, we should be guided by that. As Kyle says, I think what New Zealand does is a very noteworthy instance in everything that New Zealand does, even in terms of how it handles its tourist product. Because when you go there, you see how it's a different kind of tourism. Perhaps we can take some lessons from that. I was thinking particularly by the way of education, the fact that we are stymied by this. I mean, parents are up in arms that they are now doing this crisis teaching at home. They are ill-equipped to do it. And I want to make the point, though, that a lot of times we think what we're doing now is online teaching. No. We have simply moved, we've taken our face-to-face, a lot of us, and just plugged it right into doing it on the internet. But no, I think that what we might want to look at is how we reorganize the content, how we create a pedagogical framework that's going to undergird what we do. So as Dr. Vokaty said, a 5-year-old in front of a television screen may not be the best way to get them to learn. But everything happened because we were being pushed. But now that for a lot of us, it's now the summer. It's a time where some of us are finished. So for those of us on that calendar, it's a time for us to sit back, to reassess, to assess what we've done, to evaluate it, and to repackage it. And I'm looking forward as an educator, as somebody who has been very involved in the Caribbean Examination Council, the regional exam for the Caribbean, I am offering my services to look at how we can now look at the curriculum again and think of delivery in instances where we are not allowed to go back to face-to-face teaching. So I am encouraged by the fact that this is an opportunity, right? And I keep telling myself that maybe that's my way of keeping sane, of saying, let's look at the positive. Let's just try to bloom where we are planted. We are here now. What can we do? All of us together moving, and conversations like this present us with a wonderful opportunity to go forward.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a wonderful way to conclude this session, really, as it relates to a positive approach. While there are many challenges related to how individuals, countries, the world react and respond, it requires for us to probably begin with ourselves. And eventually that will collectively amalgamate into a global response as well. I'm reminded though that, maybe decades ago, countries, for the most part, would have explored a collectivistic approach to how they interact and engage each other. And as we began to pursue our own agenda as individual persons, as individual countries, regions as well, we sort of evolved our principles from a collective communal perspective to a more individualistic perspective. And that has led to many different types of developments and approaches as well. And while we are quite individual, experiences such as COVID-19 requires for us to be quite communal, not necessarily physically, of course, but communal in terms of our collective approaches. And that's where I think we should leave the session as we think about going forward with COVID-19. But when I conceptualize this idea of a community, it's not because we're all sharing the same experience. We know because of disparities. We appreciate because of differences in realities. Different people have different experiences. Some persons are able to adjust more feasibly in terms of economy, in terms of their own level of comfort, in terms of their income and even food source as well. Whereas increasingly this is becoming a more significant challenge for many parts of the world. So we have to bear that in mind. I believe as well as we collectively respond, effort has to be placed in decisions, in practices with regards to working with, engaging, and catering for those that are most disproportionately affected in our societies. And that's a principle that should be at every level of decision making, whether it's easing the lockdown, whether it's whatever other policies and practices that are advised or subscribed. We really have to focus on the vulnerable in our societies. And that's where I think our efforts should be most focused, and certainly it is most needed as well at the same time. Well, that's it, guys. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panel for joining us and for allowing this course to continue in understanding the fluid dynamic of COVID-19, because we are continuing to evolve and respond in the course with the pandemic as well. We would like to thank our course community, our very active and diverse and international course community, who continue to share their own experiences with us along the way. And while this panel discussion ends now, the conversation continues. We can get into our discussion forum and we can continue with the conversations on this panel topic and, of course, COVID-19 going forward. So thank you to our panel and thank you to our course community for this live discussion. And we look forward to joining you at another date, another time, as St. George's University continues to explore COVID-19. Thank you, and it is goodbye for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate you joining us and keep well.